I never imagined the man I trusted most would throw me out of our home like trash, believing his daughter's lies without even giving me a chance to defend myself. That cold November morning in Portland, Oregon, when Marcus told me to pack my things and leave, changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and justice. My name is Sarah, and I'm 42 years old. I married Marcus Henderson 3 years ago, thinking I'd found my forever partner. He was a successful architect, 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes that used to look at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. His daughter Jessica from his first marriage was 23 when we met, already living on her own and working as a marketing assistant downtown. My parents had warned me before the wedding. Mom sat me down in her kitchen, holding my hands across the table covered with her favorite floral tablecloth. She said Jessica wasn't what she seemed, that there was something calculating in her eyes at family gatherings. Dad was more direct, telling me outright that Jessica resented any woman in her father's life. But I was in love, and I thought I could win her over with patience and kindness. The first year of marriage was mostly peaceful. Jessica kept her distance, showing up for mandatory holidays with a tight smile and leaving as soon as politely possible. The rainy Portland winters felt cozy in our craftsman-style home in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. Marcus and I would sit by the fireplace on those gray afternoons, planning our future together. We talked about traveling to Europe, maybe starting a small garden in the backyard come spring, growing old together watching the cherry blossoms bloom each year along our tree-lined street. Everything shifted last October when Jessica lost her job. She called Marcus crying, saying her roommate was moving out and she couldn't afford rent alone. Before I could even process what was happening, Marcus suggested she move into our guest room, just temporarily, until she got back on her feet. I agreed because I wanted to support him, to show I could be the caring stepmother who helped family in crisis. That decision became my biggest mistake. Jessica moved in on a Friday afternoon, the sky heavy with autumn clouds threatening rain. She arrived with more boxes than seemed reasonable for a temporary stay. I helped her unpack, trying to make conversation, asking about her job search, offering to look over her resume. She gave short answers, barely making eye contact, her blonde hair falling forward to hide her face. That first dinner together was awkward, filled with long silences broken only by the sound of forks against plates. Marcus tried to keep things light, talking about a new project at work, but the tension sat at that table like an uninvited guest. If you're following this story and want to hear what happens next, please hit that subscribe button. Your subscription really helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and it means the world to have you as part of this community. Within 2 weeks, subtle things started happening. Small things at first. My favorite coffee mug disappeared. I found it days later in Jessica's room when I went to drop off her laundry. She claimed she must have taken it by accident. Then my expensive face cream went missing from the bathroom. My keys ended up in strange places. A package I ordered never arrived, though the tracking said it was delivered. Marcus dismissed my concerns, saying I was probably just forgetful, stressed from work. I worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, and yes, tax season could be demanding, but I wasn't losing my mind. The weather turned colder as November arrived, bringing that characteristic Portland drizzle that seems to seep into everything. The city took on that gray-green cast, moss growing thick on the north sides of trees, the smell of wet pavement and fallen leaves filling the air. Inside our home, the atmosphere grew colder too. Jessica started making little comments at dinner, nothing overtly hostile, just enough to sting. Mentioning how Marcus's first wife used to make his favorite dish differently. Talking about family memories from before I existed in their lives. Showing him old photos on her phone, the two of them laughing at inside jokes I couldn't understand. One evening in mid-November, I came home from work around 6:30. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I could hear Jessica's voice before I even closed the front door, high-pitched and theatrical, saying something about medication. When I walked in, she was standing by the counter with Marcus, pointing at an orange prescription bottle. Her eyes were red, makeup smeared, looking every bit the distressed victim. Marcus's face was stone when he turned to me. What happened next felt like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Jessica claimed the bottle was hers, prescribed for anxiety after losing her job. She said she'd found it in my nightstand drawer, pills missing, and accused me of stealing her medication. The accusation was so absurd I actually laughed, which Marcus took as deflection. I tried to explain I had no idea where that bottle came from, that I'd never even been in her room without permission, let alone taken anything. But Jessica was crying harder now, saying this explained why she'd been feeling so anxious, why her pills were running out faster than they should. Marcus asked me to explain how her prescription bottle ended up in our bedroom. I couldn't. I had no explanation because I hadn't put it there. The look in his eyes that moment, that's something I'll never forget. Where there used to be love and trust, I saw doubt. I saw him choosing to believe her tears over my truth. I felt the ground shifting under my feet, the life I'd built crumbling like sand castles against an incoming tide. Things escalated rapidly after that. Jessica started claiming other things were missing. A necklace her late mother had given her. Money from her wallet. She played the role of wounded daughter perfectly, always crying at just the right moments, her voice trembling when she spoke to Marcus about how unsafe she felt in the house. And Marcus, blinded by fatherly protectiveness, believed every word. He started looking at me differently, with suspicion in those brown eyes that used to hold such warmth. I tried to defend myself, to explain that Jessica was manipulating him, but every attempt made me look more guilty in his eyes. He said I was being paranoid, that I was jealous of his relationship with his daughter. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my marriage. Outside, Portland's winter rains intensified, November storms battering the windows, wind stripping the last leaves from the Japanese maple in our front yard. Inside, the storm between us grew worse. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you're invested in this story. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription helps us create more content like this. Just click that red subscribe button. The final blow came 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to Marcus standing by the bed, fully dressed for work, his expression cold and distant. Before I could even say good morning, he told me Jessica had found another bottle in my car, this time her antidepressants. He said she'd gone to check my car for something she left there and discovered pills hidden in the glove compartment. The accusation was insane. I didn't even know what medications she was supposedly taking. But when I tried to argue, tried to point out how convenient it was that she kept finding her things in my spaces, Marcus cut me off. He said he couldn't live with someone who stole medication from his daughter, who made her feel unsafe in what was supposed to be her temporary refuge. He said he'd given me chances to come clean, to admit what I'd done and seek help, but I'd chosen to lie instead. The words felt like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. I remember the rain outside was particularly heavy that morning, drumming against the roof, water streaming down the windows, turning everything outside into blurred shapes and colors. Then he said it, the words that ended everything. He told me to pack my essential things and leave. Just like that. 3 years of marriage, dismissed in a single conversation. He said he'd arrange for the rest of my belongings to be sent wherever I ended up, but he wanted me out of the house by the end of the day. I could see Jessica hovering in the hallway behind him, and I swear I caught the tiniest smirk on her face before she rearranged her expression into concern. I was too shocked to fight, too devastated to argue. I packed a suitcase with shaking hands, grabbed my laptop and important documents, and left the home I'd thought would be mine forever. The November cold felt appropriate, matching the ice forming around my heart. Rain soaked through my jacket as I loaded my car, each trip to and from the house more surreal than the last. Marcus didn't help. He didn't even watch. He'd already left for work, like throwing out his wife was just another Tuesday morning task completed before heading to the office. I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton, windshield wipers barely keeping up with the downpour, tears mixing with rain in my vision. When Mom opened the door and saw my face, she didn't say "I told you so," though she would have been justified. She just pulled me inside, Dad taking my suitcase, both of them holding me while I broke down in their entryway. They'd seen this coming, warned me about Jessica's character, But loving someone means hoping you're wrong about the warning signs. For 3 weeks, I stayed in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded posters and old books, feeling like a failure at 42 years old. I couldn't eat, barely slept, replayed every moment trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. My parents were amazing, giving me space when I needed it, support when I asked, never once making me feel like a burden. Dad would bring me coffee in the mornings, Mom would sit with me in the evenings, both of them helping me process the betrayal. But something shifted inside me during that 3rd week. The hurt began transforming into something else. Clarity, anger, determination. I realized I'd been so focused on being the victim of Jessica's lies that I hadn't thought about fighting back. My parents didn't raise me to roll over and accept injustice. They raised me to be smart, strategic, and when necessary, ruthless in protecting myself. If this story is resonating with you, consider subscribing to the channel. We're on a journey to 1,000 subscribers, and having you along makes this community stronger. Just hit that subscribe button below. I started by calling my best friend Rachel, who worked as a private investigator. We'd been friends since college, and she'd been furious when she heard what Marcus had done. Over coffee at a small cafe in downtown Beaverton, rain pattering against the windows, I told her everything. She listened, took notes, and then smiled in that way that meant she was already formulating a plan. She said Jessica's scheme had the hallmarks of someone who'd done this before, and people who run cons usually leave trails. Rachel started investigating while I began documenting everything I could remember. Every incident, every accusation, dates and times and witnesses when available. I went through my phone, pulling up text messages, emails, anything that might establish a timeline. I also called a lawyer, Emily Chun, who specialized in divorce cases. She had a reputation for being tough and thorough, exactly what I needed. Emily told me to change all my passwords, secure my financial accounts, and prepare for Marcus to possibly try to use Jessica's accusations against me in divorce proceedings. Within a week, Rachel uncovered gold. Jessica had been fired from her previous job, not laid off like she claimed. The reason? Stealing from colleagues and blaming others. There were complaints from her former roommate about missing items and manipulative behavior. Rachel even found Jessica's social media posts from months before she supposedly lost her job, posts planning to move back home, calling it a strategic move. She'd orchestrated the whole thing to get back into her father's house and life. But the best discovery was security footage. Rachel learned that Jessica had been visiting our house regularly before she officially moved in, times when both Marcus and I were at work. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned seeing Jessica's car there on several occasions. Mrs. Patterson had always been friendly, often waving from her garden as she tended her roses. When Rachel interviewed her formally, she provided dates and times, even some photos she'd taken coincidentally while documenting her garden that showed Jessica's car in our driveway. With this information, Rachel reached out to Jessica's previous targets, yes, plural. She'd apparently pulled similar schemes with her father's past girlfriends. 2 women came forward, both willing to provide statements about Jessica's pattern of manipulation, false accusations, and orchestrated scenarios designed to drive them away from Marcus. Both had been too hurt and embarrassed to speak up before, but learning they weren't alone gave them courage. The prescription bottles were trickier to prove, but Rachel had an idea. She suggested we get phone records, which Emily subpoenaed as part of the divorce filing. Those records showed Jessica had been in contact with someone who worked at a pharmacy, frequent texts and calls. Further investigation, legal investigation through proper channels, revealed Jessica had obtained multiple prescriptions in her name, many of which she didn't actually need, likely using them as props for her scheme. 3 weeks after Marcus threw me out, he called. I was sitting in my parents' living room, watching rain streak down the windows, when his name appeared on my phone screen. My first instinct was to decline, but curiosity won. His voice was different, softer, almost uncertain. He asked if I'd had time to reflect on my actions, if I was ready to apologize to Jessica, and possibly discuss reconciliation if I sought professional help for my supposed issues. Your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. It only takes a second to click that button. The audacity stunned me into silence for a moment. Then something inside me snapped into perfect clarity. I told him I had indeed done some reflecting, and I'd be happy to meet with him and Jessica together. He sounded relieved, probably thinking I was going to grovel and beg for forgiveness. We arranged to meet at our house, the following afternoon. I didn't tell him I'd be bringing company. That night, I barely slept, running through everything in my mind, making sure every document was in order, every piece of evidence ready. Rachel had compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Emily had prepared the divorce papers, including a detailed accounting of Jessica's fraud and manipulation, demanding full accountability and compensation for emotional distress. We had statements from Jessica's previous victims, employment records proving her lies, security footage showing her suspicious presence at the house, and phone records connecting her to fraudulent prescription activity. The next day dawned gray and cold, typical Portland December weather, but I felt warm with purpose for the first time in weeks. I dressed carefully, professionally, wanting to look like someone who had her life together, not a broken woman begging for scraps. Rachel and Emily met me at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the house. We reviewed everything one final time, Emily reminding me to stay calm, to let the evidence speak for itself. We arrived at the house at 2 o'clock sharp. Marcus opened the door looking confident, maybe even a little smug, like he'd won some victory by making me come crawling back. Jessica was in the living room, sitting on the couch that I'd picked out, in the home I'd helped make beautiful, looking like the innocent victim she'd played so well. Her expression changed when she saw Rachel and Emily behind me, confusion flickering across her features. Marcus asked who they were, his tone already defensive. I introduced them calmly. Rachel, my private investigator. Emily, my divorce attorney. The color drained from his face, but Jessica recovered quickly, standing up and asking what kind of game I was playing. I told them both to sit down, that this wouldn't take long, and then I'd be out of their lives forever, just like they wanted. Emily started by serving Marcus the divorce papers. His hands shook slightly as he took them, reality beginning to penetrate his certainty. Then I began laying out the evidence, piece by piece, watching Jessica's performance crumble in real time. I started with her employment history, the real reason she was fired, the complaints from colleagues. Marcus tried to interrupt, but Emily firmly told him to listen to everything before speaking. Next came the statements from his previous girlfriends, women he'd cared about who Jessica had systematically destroyed with the same tactics she'd used on me. I watched recognition dawn on Marcus's face, pieces clicking into place, patterns he'd been too blind to see. Jessica started to protest, her voice rising, but Rachel calmly presented the phone records showing her contact with the pharmacy employee, suggesting illegal acquisition of prescriptions for fraudulent purposes. The security footage was the knockout punch. Mrs. Patterson's testimony about Jessica's unauthorized visits to the house, combined with a timeline of when items supposedly went missing, painted a clear picture of someone planting evidence. Jessica's face went from pale to flushed, her carefully maintained composure shattering. She tried to claim it was all circumstantial, that I'd somehow fabricated everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. If you're still with me on this journey, please take a moment to subscribe. We're building something special here, working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every person who joins us matters. Click that subscribe button and be part of this growing community. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He kept staring at Jessica, then at the papers in his hands, then back at his daughter. He asked her if it was true, his voice breaking slightly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, watching his world collapse around him. Jessica tried to maintain her innocence, tears streaming down her face, but even her acting couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. Then she made a mistake. She got angry, really angry, dropping the victim act entirely. She screamed that I'd never belonged in their family, that her father was hers first, that every woman who tried to replace her mother deserved what they got. The mask came off completely, revealing the calculating, manipulative person my parents had warned me about. She'd orchestrated everything, planned every detail to drive me out, and she'd almost gotten away with it. Marcus sat down heavily, his head in his hands. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to gloat over being proven right. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the time wasted. Sad for the man who'd let his daughter poison his life. Sad for the marriage that could have been beautiful, if not for Jessica's toxicity. Emily calmly explained that we had grounds for legal action against Jessica for fraud, defamation, and potentially criminal charges related to the prescription scheme. Jessica's anger turned to panic. She looked at Marcus, expecting him to defend her, to fix this like he always had. But he was staring at her like he'd never seen her before, the scales finally falling from his eyes. He asked her why, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, just grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. We could hear her car start, tires squealing as she drove away into the gray afternoon. Marcus tried to apologize, words tumbling over each other, saying he'd been wrong, he'd been blind, begging me to forgive him. But some things can't be forgiven, not really. Trust, once shattered completely, can't be glued back together into something whole. I'd loved him, truly loved him, but he'd thrown me out without a second thought, believing lies over our marriage vows. That kind of betrayal doesn't wash away with apologies. Emily laid out the terms of the divorce. I wanted the house, half of all marital assets, and compensation for emotional distress. Marcus didn't fight any of it. He signed the papers that day, his hand trembling, looking defeated and small. I felt nothing but relief. This chapter of my life was closing, and I could finally start healing. Rachel and Emily walked out with me, the three of us stepping into the cold December air that felt fresher than it had in months. Take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Your subscription helps us reach 1,000 subscribers and keeps stories like this coming. Just click that red button below. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. Marcus didn't contest the divorce, everything moving through the system faster than typical. Jessica disappeared for a while, apparently staying with friends, avoiding both her father and any legal consequences Rachel had warned her were possible. Marcus tried to reach out several times, calls and texts I mostly ignored. Emily handled the necessary communications. My parents were incredible throughout everything, celebrating small victories with me, supporting me through the harder moments when grief caught up with anger. Mom would make my favorite meals. Dad would tell terrible jokes trying to make me smile. Slowly, the numbness began to fade, replaced by something that felt almost like myself again, but stronger, more aware of my worth. By January, the divorce was finalized. The house was mine, along with a fair settlement that reflected both marital assets and compensation for what I'd endured. Marcus moved into an apartment downtown, our paths no longer crossing. Jessica apparently tried to move back in with him, but according to mutual acquaintances, he refused, finally setting boundaries he should have established years ago. Their relationship was fractured, maybe beyond repair, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I spent weeks making the house my own again, painting walls, rearranging furniture, erasing traces of the life I'd tried to build with Marcus. Each change felt cathartic, like reclaiming space that had been contaminated. My parents helped, Dad painting while Mom directed decorating choices. The house transformed from a place of painful memories into something fresh and entirely mine. Rachel's investigation also uncovered enough evidence for the pharmacy board to investigate Jessica's activities, which resulted in her facing potential charges. She'd apparently been selling some medications she'd fraudulently obtained, a side hustle that made her scheme even more criminal than we'd initially thought. Marcus was horrified when he learned the full extent of his daughter's actions, the realization that he'd protected a criminal finally penetrating his denial. In February, Marcus reached out one final time, asking to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed, more out of curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. We met at a small cafe in the Pearl District, rain falling steadily outside like it had throughout this entire ordeal. He looked tired, older, gray streaking his hair more prominently than before. He apologized again, more coherently this time, acknowledging everything he'd done wrong, how he'd failed me, failed us. He told me Jessica was in therapy, court-mandated after the investigation into her activities. He'd helped arrange treatment, but maintained distance, trying to figure out how to be her father without enabling her destructive behavior. He said he understood if I hated him, that he hated himself for what he'd done. But I didn't hate him, not anymore. Hate requires energy I wasn't willing to spend on him. I felt indifferent, like he was someone I'd known in another life. I told him I hoped he'd learn something from all this, hoped he'd treat future relationships with more trust and wisdom. Then I finished my coffee, wished him well with genuine sincerity, and walked out into the Portland rain feeling lighter than I had in months. That chapter was truly closed, no loose ends, no unfinished business. Just a lesson learned about trusting my instincts and the people who'd known me longest. If you've made it this far in the story, we'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. Help us reach that 1,000 subscriber milestone. Your support makes everything we do possible. Spring arrived eventually, as it always does in the Pacific Northwest, transforming the city with cherry blossoms and clear blue skies after months of gray. I started dating again, casually, taking my time and listening to my gut instincts about people. Work kept me busy, a promotion coming through in March that I'd been working toward for 2 years. My parents were thrilled, taking me out to celebrate at my favorite Italian restaurant in Northwest Portland. The house felt like home now, truly mine in a way it never had been when I was trying to make it work for Marcus, for Jessica, for everyone but myself. I planted flowers in the garden, bright tulips and daffodils that seemed to mirror my slowly returning optimism. Friends would visit on weekends. We'd cook together in the kitchen I'd remodeled, drink wine on the back patio when the weather allowed, laugh about everything and nothing. One Saturday afternoon in April, I saw Marcus downtown, walking with a woman I didn't recognize. They looked comfortable together, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling at something on his phone. I felt nothing but mild curiosity, no jealousy, no regret, just a distant hope that maybe he'd learned from our disaster. I didn't approach them, just continued on my way to meet Rachel for lunch, grateful for friends who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. Jessica, according to the social media posts I occasionally checked out of morbid curiosity, had moved to Seattle. She'd posted about fresh starts and learning from past mistakes, though nothing suggesting genuine accountability for what she'd done. I didn't know if she'd ever really face consequences or change her behavior, but she was no longer my problem. Marcus would have to navigate that relationship on his own, with hopefully clearer eyes than before. By summer, my life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Morning coffee on the patio, work that challenged and fulfilled me, evenings with friends or quiet nights reading in the living room, weekends exploring Portland's trails and neighborhoods. I joined a book club, started taking pottery classes, filled my life with activities that brought genuine joy rather than obligation. The pottery was particularly therapeutic, something about shaping clay with my hands, creating something beautiful from raw material. My parents loved seeing me happy again, really happy, not the performance I'd been putting on during my marriage when things started going wrong. Mom said I looked lighter, that the tension I'd been carrying had finally released. Dad joked that he'd never trusted Marcus anyway, though I knew he had until Jessica's manipulation became obvious. They were just grateful to have their daughter back, the version of me that had gotten lost trying to make a doomed marriage work. One evening in late August, almost a year after the nightmare began, I sat on my back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, summer holding on before autumn's return, jasmine blooming along the fence filling the evening with sweet fragrance. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain and betrayal, but also the strength I'd discovered, the clarity that came from surviving something I'd thought might destroy me. Before we wrap up, I want to ask one more time for your subscription. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and having you as part of this community means the world. Please click that subscribe button and join us. I'd learned that my parents' instincts about people were usually right, honed from decades of experience I should have trusted. I'd learned that love without trust is just a pretty word, meaningless when tested. I'd learned that standing up for yourself, fighting back against injustice, is always worth it, even when it feels impossible. Most importantly, I'd learned that I didn't need someone else to complete my life, that I was whole and valuable entirely on my own. The house I'd fought for, the home I'd reclaimed, represented more than just property or victory over Marcus and Jessica's manipulations. It represented my refusal to be a victim, my determination to take control of my own narrative. Every room held memories now of rebuilding, of creating something authentically mine from the ashes of a failed marriage. The kitchen where I'd cried those first awful days now hosted dinner parties with friends. The bedroom where Marcus had told me to leave now felt like a sanctuary, peaceful and entirely my space. Looking back, I could see how Jessica's campaign had been methodical, calculated, each step designed to isolate me and undermine Marcus's trust. She'd played on his protective fatherly instincts, weaponizing his love for her against our marriage. If I'd seen the pattern earlier, if I'd trusted my parents' warnings, maybe things would have been different. But there's no point in dwelling on what-ifs and maybes. The past happened exactly as it did, teaching me lessons I apparently needed to learn. Marcus had sent a card on what would have been our 4th anniversary, apologizing again, acknowledging the date he knew I'd remember. I'd read it once and thrown it away. Some gestures come too late to matter, words that might have meant something if offered when they were needed, empty now that the wound had scarred over. I didn't wish him ill, didn't hope for his suffering, but I also didn't need his continued apologies. I needed him to stay in the past where he belonged. Jessica's social media showed her with new friends in Seattle, posting inspirational quotes about growth and transformation that felt performative to anyone who knew her history. Maybe she was genuinely trying to change. Maybe the legal and personal consequences had sparked some self-awareness. Or maybe she'd just found new victims to manipulate, new situations to control. Either way, she was far from my life, unable to touch the peace I'd built. The divorce settlement had been generous enough that I'd been able to travel that summer, visiting places I'd always wanted to see. I'd spent 2 weeks in Italy, wandering through Tuscany vineyards, eating pasta in small trattorias, feeling more alive than I had in years. Traveling solo had been intimidating at first, but it became liberating, making my own schedule, answering to no one, rediscovering who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone's wife or stepmother. As autumn approached again, 1 year since the nightmare began, I felt genuinely grateful for everything that had happened. Not grateful for the pain, but grateful for the person I'd become through surviving it. Stronger, wiser, more selective about who I let into my inner circle. My parents had been right about Jessica, and I'd learned to trust the instincts of people who'd known and loved me longest. That lesson alone was worth the price of admission to this painful education. The house stood solid and beautiful in the Laurelhouse neighborhood, cherry trees preparing for their autumn display, the Japanese maple in front glowing red gold in the September light. This was my home, earned through pain and perseverance, a physical representation of refusing to let someone else's toxicity define my life. Every morning I woke up here felt like a small victory, proof that I'd survived and thrived despite everything designed to break me. If you're still here with me at the end of this journey, please subscribe to the channel. We need your support to reach 1,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories like this one. Click that subscribe button right now. I'd started seeing someone new recently, Tom, a landscape architect I'd met at Rachel's birthday party. He was kind, patient, asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. We were taking things slow, both of us carrying baggage from previous relationships, but it felt healthy, balanced, nothing like the dynamic I'd had with Marcus. Tom had met my parents early on, passing their scrutiny with flying colors, which I now recognized as essential rather than optional. When I told Tom about everything with Marcus and Jessica, he'd listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, validated my experience without trying to fix or minimize it. He'd said I was brave for fighting back, for not accepting the role of victim they'd tried to force on me. That conversation, his respect for my strength, meant more than romantic gestures or expensive gifts ever could. It suggested maybe I'd learned to recognize real partnership instead of performance. The legal proceedings against Jessica had concluded with probation and community service, lesser charges than she could have faced, but enough to create a criminal record following her to future endeavors. Marcus had tried to shield her from consequences, hiring expensive lawyers, but even his money and influence couldn't completely erase what she'd done. The pharmacy board had suspended the employee who'd helped her, the ripple effects of her scheme touching multiple lives. Rachel and I met for coffee regularly now, her investigation services having saved my life in more ways than one. She'd become even closer through the crisis, the kind of friend who shows up when things are terrible and helps you fight your way back to solid ground. We'd joke sometimes about writing a book about Jessica's scheme, though we both knew the real story was too personal, too raw to turn into entertainment for others. My career continued flourishing, the promotion leading to more interesting projects, better collaboration with colleagues I respected. Work provided structure and purpose, intellectual challenge that kept me engaged with life beyond personal drama. I'd learned to compartmentalize, to not let relationship disasters bleed into professional performance, another skill sharpened by necessity during the darkest periods. The Portland seasons continued their reliable cycle, rain giving way to cherry blossoms, giving way to summer sunshine, giving way to autumn colors, and back to rain again. There was comfort in that consistency, nature's rhythms continuing regardless of human chaos. I'd spent so much time during the marriage trying to control things beyond my control, worrying about Jessica's approval, Marcus's moods, the impossible task of making everyone happy. Now I focused on what I could control, my reactions, my boundaries, my choices about who deserved space in my life. Looking at the divorce papers filed away in my office, official proof that chapter had ended, I felt only relief. The woman who'd left this house in November, devastated and disbelieving, barely resembled the woman who'd reclaimed it months later with evidence and iron will. Both versions were me, but I preferred the stronger iteration, the one who'd learned that sometimes the people warning you about danger are right, that trust should be earned, not automatically given, that fighting for yourself is always worthwhile. If you've enjoyed this story and want more content like this, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Click that button and join our community. Marcus and I would never speak again, probably, and that was fine. We'd said everything that needed saying in that final coffee meeting, achieving closure that many divorced couples never find. He'd have to live with the knowledge that he destroyed something good because he couldn't see his daughter's true nature until too late. That was his burden to carry, not mine. I'd moved forward, built something new and better from the wreckage of what we'd tried to create together. Jessica would always be his daughter, that biological connection permanent regardless of their fractured relationship. He'd have to navigate what fatherhood meant when your child has proven toxic and manipulative, whether unconditional love required enabling destructive behavior or if real love meant accountability and boundaries. Those were questions he'd have to answer for himself, hopefully with better judgment than he'd shown before. As for me, I'd learned that home isn't just a physical space but a feeling of safety and authenticity. The Laurelhurst house had become that for me, not because of its beautiful architecture or tree-lined street, but because it represented my refusal to accept injustice, my willingness to fight for what was mine, my commitment to building a life reflecting my true values rather than someone else's expectations. The pottery classes had produced some interesting pieces, bowls and vases in earth tones that lined my kitchen shelves. Each one imperfect but functional, beautiful in their own way, much like the life I'd reconstructed. I'd learned that you could take broken things, smashed pieces of what used to be, and if you were patient and skilled enough, create something new and valuable. Not the same as before, but perhaps better for having survived the breaking. My book club had become a cherished part of weekly routine, 8 women gathering monthly to discuss literature and inevitably veering into life discussions over wine and cheese. Several were divorced, others in long marriages, one recently widowed, all of us navigating life's complexities with humor and mutual support. They'd been there when I was raw from Marcus's betrayal, offering perspective and solidarity, without judgment. That kind of community, chosen family, mattered more than any romance. The ceramic workshop where I took classes was in Southeast Portland, a converted warehouse with high ceilings and north-facing windows providing perfect light. My instructor, Linda, was a 60-year-old artist with clay permanently under her fingernails and wisdom earned through decades of living authentically. She'd once told me that pottery teaches patience, that you can't rush the process without ruining the piece, a metaphor I'd applied to my own healing journey. 1 year after that terrible November morning when Marcus threw me out, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, sunlight streaming through windows I'd chosen new curtains for, and felt genuinely at peace. The anniversary of that awful day had arrived not with dread, but with quiet gratitude for how far I'd traveled. I'd survived what felt unsurvivable, transformed pain into power, and built a life that belonged entirely to me. That morning, I made coffee in the kitchen. I'd repainted a soft sage green, so different from the sterile white Jessica had admired. Every choice in this house now reflected my taste, my personality, my vision. The living room had warm amber walls, comfortable furniture arranged for actual conversation rather than showpiece perfection. Plants thrived in corners where Marcus's minimalist aesthetic had demanded empty space. This was a home that breathed, that welcomed, that felt alive in ways it never had during our marriage. Tom was coming over for dinner that evening, our relationship having progressed to comfortable domesticity without losing its spark. He understood my need for independence, having his own well-developed life that complemented rather than consumed mine. We talked about future possibilities without pressure or ultimatums, both of us content to let things unfold naturally. My parents adored him, which mattered more now than it would have before I'd learned the cost of ignoring their judgment. I spent the afternoon preparing dinner, chopping vegetables for roasted autumn soup, baking bread that filled the house with yeast and warmth. Cooking had become meditative, the simple act of creating nourishment from raw ingredients satisfying in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was about control, about transforming things through my own effort into something better. Or maybe I just enjoyed good food and the peace of my kitchen on quiet afternoons. Rachel called around 3, checking in as she often did on significant dates. She'd become the sister I'd never had, the friend who'd quite literally saved my life by uncovering Jessica's web of lies. We talked about everything and nothing, her new case that sounded fascinating if legally complex, my upcoming work presentation, the movie we were planning to see next weekend. Normal life stuff, the beautiful mundane reality of days unmarked by crisis. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We're building toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins us helps create this community. Just click that red subscribe button below. Emily had sent a card earlier that week, a simple note congratulating me on the anniversary of my divorce filing, celebrating it as Liberation Day rather than loss. She'd become more than my attorney, a mentor of sorts, showing me how women could be powerful and professional without sacrificing compassion. She'd guided me through the legal maze with competence and genuine care, never letting Marcus's attempts at manipulation gain traction. The divorce settlement had been finalized for months now, every detail resolved, Marcus having learned the expensive lesson of believing lies over truth. The house was entirely mine, along with a substantial financial settlement that reflected both marital assets and compensation for emotional damages. Emily had been ruthless in negotiations, pushing for accountability that Marcus couldn't weasel out of despite his attempts. His lawyer had tried claiming I was being vindictive, but the evidence of Jessica's scheme spoke for itself. I'd used some of the settlement money to travel, but most sat invested for future security. The Italy trip had been transformative, but I'd also visited my college roommate in Boston, spent a week hiking in Colorado, driven down the Oregon coast, stopping at every charming small town that caught my interest. Each journey reinforced the reality that I was whole on my own, that happiness came from within rather than from another person completing me. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor whose testimony had helped expose Jessica's unauthorized house visits, had become a good friend. She'd bring over produce from her impressive garden, I'd help her with technology problems or household repairs requiring a younger person's strength. She'd lived alone since her husband died a decade ago, modeling the kind of independent contentment I aspired to maintain regardless of relationship status. She never pitted me for the divorce, instead celebrating my strength in fighting back against injustice. The fall colors had reached peak beauty, the neighborhood transformed into a canvas of red, orange, and gold. I'd walk most mornings before work, breathing crisp air that smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves, marveling at Portland's ability to be simultaneously gray and gorgeous. Those walks cleared my head, set intentions for each day, reminded me to notice beauty even in mundane moments. Sometimes Mrs. Patterson would join me, moving slowly but steadily, sharing stories from her 78 years with humor and wisdom. Tom arrived at 6:30, bringing wine and wildflowers picked from his own garden. He kissed me hello, easy and natural, then helped finish dinner preparations without needing direction. We'd fallen into comfortable rhythms, working together in the kitchen, conversation flowing alongside cooking. He told me about a difficult client at work. I shared funny moments from my day, both of us listening with genuine interest rather than waiting for our turn to talk. Over dinner, we discussed the anniversary, what it meant to me now versus what I'd feared it would feel like. Tom asked thoughtful questions, never pushing but creating space for me to process aloud if I wanted. I told him I felt grateful, which seemed strange given the pain that year had contained, but genuine nonetheless. I discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed, learned lessons about trust and boundaries that would serve me forever, and emerged on the other side more authentically myself than perhaps I'd ever been. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel if this story has touched you. We need your help reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support means absolutely everything. Click that button right now and join us. Tom raised his wine glass, proposing a toast to surviving, thriving, and the courage to fight for yourself. We clinked glasses, the sound crystal clear in my quiet kitchen, sealing the moment. He understood what this year had cost me, respected the journey I'd traveled, and loved the person I'd become without trying to fix or change anything about me. That acceptance felt revolutionary after a marriage spent trying to be whatever Marcus needed while never quite measuring up to the ghost of his first wife. After dinner, we sat on the back patio wrapped in blankets against the November cold, watching stars emerge as darkness deepened. Tom told me about a project he was designing, a public park incorporating native plants and sustainable water features. His passion for his work mirrored mine for accounting, that satisfaction of solving complex problems with creativity and precision. We were well-matched in ambition and drive, neither of us content with mediocrity in our professional lives. He left around 10, both of us having early meetings the next morning, but not before making plans for the weekend. We were driving to the coast, renting a cabin in Cannon Beach, spending 2 days walking on sand and eating fresh seafood, and generally enjoying each other's company away from daily responsibilities. I was looking forward to it with uncomplicated excitement, no anxiety about whether I was doing relationships correctly, just anticipation of good times ahead. Alone again in my house, I did the dishes slowly, meditatively, warm water, and soap suds oddly soothing. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson's house, lights glowing warm and welcoming. Beyond that, the neighborhood stretched out in familiar patterns, houses I'd walked past hundreds of times, trees I'd watched change with seasons, the geographic markers of a life I'd rebuilt with intention and care. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asking how the anniversary felt, if I needed company or conversation. I texted back that I was good, really good, planning to call them tomorrow. They'd been my foundation through the worst of it, never wavering in support, and I tried to express gratitude for them regularly now, aware of how easily I could have faced everything alone if not for their love and solid presence. Before bed, I stood in the doorway of the guest room where Jessica had stayed during those awful weeks. I'd completely redecorated it months ago, turning it into a home office with a comfortable reading chair by the window. No trace remained of her presence, the space reclaimed and repurposed for my needs. Sometimes I worked in here on weekends, appreciating the quiet and natural light, feeling victorious each time that I'd taken back every inch of territory her manipulation had poisoned. The bedroom where Marcus had told me to leave felt entirely mine now too, decorated in warm colors that made me happy, photos of my parents and friends on the dresser, books stacked on the nightstand waiting to be read. I'd bought new bedding, soft and luxurious, an investment in my own comfort. Sliding under the covers that night, I felt the kind of bone-deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you should be doing. If you're invested in this journey and want to see more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and having you as part of this community makes everything worthwhile. Just click that subscribe button. Sleep came easily, untroubled by the nightmares that had plagued me early on, when I'd wake up panicking about being homeless or destroyed by Jessica's lies. Time and justice had healed those wounds, leaving scars that reminded me of strength rather than pain. I dreamed that night of the ocean, waves rolling and steady and eternal, and woke feeling refreshed and ready for whatever the day might bring. Work consumed my attention over the following weeks, a major audit requiring intense focus and long hours. But I loved the challenge, the puzzle of numbers and regulations, finding solutions that satisfied both legal requirements and practical business needs. My colleagues respected my expertise. My boss had hinted at another promotion possibility, and I felt professionally fulfilled in ways that complemented rather than competed with my personal happiness. November slid into December, Portland entering its darkest, wettest season. But where previous years this weather had made me feel trapped and gloomy, now I found comfort in the rain, the excuse to stay cozy inside with hot tea and good books. Tom and I spent weekends exploring the city's coffee shops and bookstores, museums and restaurants, discovering Portland together with the fresh eyes of people falling in love with both the place and each other. Christmas approached, bringing invitations to holiday parties and family gatherings. My parents were hosting Christmas Eve dinner, a tradition I'd missed last year when I'd been too raw from the divorce to pretend holiday cheer. This year, I was genuinely looking forward to it, had already bought thoughtful gifts, was planning to bring Tom to meet extended family for the first time. Life felt full in healthy ways, busy with chosen commitments rather than obligation and dread. I ran into Marcus's former business partner at a networking event in mid-December. He'd heard about the divorce, expressed surprise since Marcus had always spoken so highly of me. I gave a diplomatic response about incompatibility, not wanting to gossip, but also not willing to protect Marcus's reputation at my own expense. The business partner mentioned Marcus seemed different now, quieter, maybe chastened by everything that had happened. I felt nothing hearing this, no satisfaction or sympathy, just mild interest in how a stranger's life was unfolding. Jessica's social media had gone dark months ago, her last post that generic inspirational quote about new beginnings. I'd stopped checking eventually, realizing I didn't actually care what she was doing or where she'd landed. She'd taught me valuable lessons about trusting my instincts and protecting my peace, but beyond that educational value, she was irrelevant to my life. Whatever consequences she faced or didn't face for her actions were between her, Marcus, and the legal system. Rachel's investigation had been thorough enough that other women in Jessica's orbit had been warned, a quiet network spreading information about her manipulative patterns. Whether that would stop her from hurting others or just make her more careful was impossible to know, but at least some potential victims had been given information to protect themselves. That felt like a small victory, damage mitigation, even if complete prevention wasn't possible. The pottery class finished its fall session with a small exhibition of student work. Several of my pieces were displayed, imperfect but mine, representing months of learning and patience. Tom came to the opening, genuinely impressed by what I'd created, asking intelligent questions about process and technique. My parents came too, Mom getting misty-eyed over a vase I'd made specifically for her, Dad pretending the lopsided bowl destined for his desk wasn't making him emotional. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue creating content like this. Be part of our growing community by subscribing right now. Standing in that converted warehouse, surrounded by friends and fellow students, looking at physical evidence of skills I developed during the hardest year of my life, I felt profound gratitude for the journey. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but for discovering I could survive it, could transform suffering into strength, could build something beautiful from broken pieces. The pottery was metaphor made concrete, proof that destruction doesn't have to be permanent. Christmas Eve at my parents' house was warm and crowded, extended family filling every room with laughter and conversation. Tom fit in seamlessly, charming my aunts, talking sports with uncles, playing with younger cousins without being asked. My mom pulled me aside at one point, squeezing my hand and saying how happy I looked, how proud she was of everything I'd overcome. Dad gave me a long hug, the kind that communicated volumes without words, his way of saying he'd seen my strength and was honored to be my father. We exchanged gifts after dinner, the living room chaos of wrapping paper and ribbons, and genuine appreciation for thoughtful presents. Tom had given me a beautiful leather journal, knowing I'd started writing to process the year's events, and a gift certificate for advanced pottery classes. I'd given him books he'd mentioned wanting and a vintage compass I'd found at an antique shop, symbolic of someone who helped others find direction. My parents loved the framed photos I'd chosen, moments captured throughout the year of rebuilding. That night, driving home through quiet streets decorated with holiday lights, Tom reached over and took my hand. He said he admired my resilience, my refusal to let bitterness poison the good things life still offered. I told him I'd had excellent teachers, parents who modeled healthy love, friends who showed up when things were terrible, and yes, painful lessons about what not to accept or tolerate. We were both products of our experiences, choosing consciously what to carry forward and what to leave behind. The new year arrived with its customary hopes and resolutions. I didn't make grand pronouncements about transformation, having done most of that work already. Instead, I set practical goals, professional targets, and personal growth markers, things measurable and achievable. Tom and I went to a small party with Rachel and other close friends, counting down to midnight surrounded by people who'd supported me through darkness and now celebrated my light. January brought bitter cold and occasional snow, Portland shutting down dramatically for weather that would barely register in other cities. I didn't mind being trapped at home, working remotely when possible, reading and cooking, and generally enjoying enforced rest. Tom stayed over several nights when roads were too dangerous for driving, both of us cozy and content, relationship deepening through shared domesticity and weather-imposed intimacy. By February, the divorce felt like ancient history rather than recent trauma. I'd lived an entire calendar year in my reclaimed house, celebrated every holiday and season as a single woman rebuilding her life. The grief had processed fully, leaving wisdom without wound, lessons learned without festering resentment. I'd become someone I genuinely liked, independent and strong, capable of happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's validation or presence. One afternoon, sorting through boxes in the basement, I found old photos from my marriage to Marcus. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, ordinary moments captured thinking we'd last forever. I studied them with detachment, recognizing the woman in those images, but not quite connecting to her anymore. She'd been so eager to please, so willing to doubt herself, so desperate to make things work that she'd ignored obvious warning signs. I felt compassion for her, but relief at no longer being her. Subscribe to the channel if this story has resonated with you. We need your support to reach 1,000 subscribers and continue sharing meaningful content. Click that subscribe button and join our community today. I threw most of the photos away, keeping only a few tucked in an envelope marked before stored with other archived memories. Not to torture myself with, but as reminders of growth, evidence of distance traveled. Someday, maybe I'd show them to grandchildren, telling the story of how their grandmother learned to value herself, to fight for justice, to build something beautiful after everything fell apart. Stories needed to be preserved, lessons passed down, so others might avoid similar mistakes. Spring arrived again, the cycle completing fully, Portland transforming into that impossible green that makes the rainy months worthwhile. Cherry blossoms exploded along neighborhood streets, tulips and daffodils brightened every garden, and I felt aligned with nature's renewal. I'd survived the darkness and emerged into light, stronger and wiser, and more fully myself than ever before. Tom and I had grown serious enough to discuss futures, practical conversations about whether we saw compatible paths forward. Neither of us wanted to rush, both carrying baggage from previous relationships, but the potential felt real and worth exploring. He mentioned maybe moving in together eventually, testing compatibility before any bigger commitments. I agreed tentatively, aware I'd need to protect the sanctuary I'd fought so hard to create, but willing to consider sharing it with someone who truly respected and valued me. My career continued its upward trajectory, the promotion I'd been hoping for coming through in March with substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. I celebrated with my team, with my parents, with Tom and Rachel and friends who'd supported me through everything. Success felt sweeter now, earned entirely through my own merit rather than compromised by relationship drama or emotional exhaustion from dysfunctional home life. One Saturday morning in April, I was gardening in the front yard when a car slowed in front of my house. My heart jumped, some primitive part of my brain still programmed to fear, but when I looked up it was just a young couple, clearly house hunting, admiring the property. They asked if I lived here, complimented the landscaping, wanted to know about the neighborhood. I told them it was a wonderful area, full of good people, a place where you could build a real life if you were willing to work for it. After they drove away, I sat back on my heels, hands dirty from planting herbs in the beds flanking the front steps. This house, this neighborhood, this life, all of it was mine in ways that transcended legal ownership. I'd watered these plants with tears during the darkest days, tended this garden while processing grief, watched seasons change from these windows while rebuilding my sense of self. Every inch of property was sacred ground now, purchased not with money but with resilience and determination. Mrs. Patterson came out with lemonade, a weekend ritual we'd established. We sat on my front steps, sipping cold drinks and watching neighbors pass by walking dogs or pushing strollers. She told me stories about her own hard times, losing her husband, navigating widowhood, learning to be whole alone. She said I reminded her of herself decades ago, someone who'd had to discover their own strength through necessity and came out better for it. I thanked her for the testimony that had helped save me, and she waved it off, saying good people should always stand up for each other. If you've been following this journey, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support makes everything we do possible and helps build this community. Click that subscribe button right now. Tom joined us later, arriving with takeout for lunch, fitting seamlessly into my weekend routine. The three of us ate on the patio, Mrs. Patterson entertaining us with neighborhood gossip and gardening advice. Watching Tom listen patiently to her stories, fetch her more lemonade without being asked, help carry her empty plates back to her house, I felt the warm certainty of having chosen well this time. He was kind to elderly neighbors not because I was watching, but because that's who he was, genuine goodness rather than perform virtue. That evening, after Mrs. Patterson had gone home and Tom and I were cleaning up, he told me he loved me. Not the first time he'd said it, but this time felt different, weighted with future promise rather than just present feeling. I said it back, meaning it fully, and we stood in my kitchen holding each other while the sun set through the windows, painting everything in golden light. This was what love should feel like, safe and steady and supportive, bringing out the best in both people rather than demanding sacrifice and compromise that left you hollow. We spent the evening planning a summer road trip, spreading maps across the dining room table, marking places we wanted to visit together. Olympic National Park, the San Juan Islands, maybe crossing into British Columbia if we had time. The planning itself was joyful, anticipating adventures with someone whose company I genuinely enjoyed, whose presence enhanced rather than complicated my life. Such a different experience from my marriage to Marcus, where every plan had to account for his moods, Jessica's potential interference, the exhausting navigation of dysfunctional family dynamics. May brought my birthday, turning 43 surrounded by people I loved and who loved me authentically. My parents hosted a barbecue, friends filling their backyard with laughter and conversation. Rachel gave a toast about my strength and resilience that made me cry happy tears. Tom presented a gift that showed he'd been paying attention, a collection of rare books I'd mentioned wanting and a weekend reservation at a coastal inn I'd once said looked magical. The day felt celebratory in ways birthdays hadn't for years, marking another year not with dread, but with gratitude for being alive. Work remained challenging and fulfilling, my expanded role bringing interesting projects and increased visibility within the company. I'd been asked to speak at an industry conference in the fall, recognition of expertise I'd spent years developing. Professional success mattered more now, not as compensation for personal unhappiness, but as genuine achievement independent of relationship status. I was building a legacy, a career that would outlast any marriage, accomplishments entirely my own. The summer road trip with Tom exceeded expectations. 10 days exploring the Pacific Northwest, sleeping in small coastal towns, hiking through old-growth forests, eating fresh oysters and local wine. We talked for hours, comfortable silences punctuated by meaningful conversations, learning each other's dreams and fears without judgment. One night, camping under impossibly clear skies far from city lights, Tom asked if I'd ever consider marriage again. I said honestly I didn't know. That marriage itself wasn't the problem, but choosing poorly had been, and I'd need absolute certainty before risking that vulnerability again. He nodded understanding, saying he appreciated my honesty, that he'd rather know where I stood than have me pretend otherwise. That response, respecting my truth rather than trying to change my mind, made me trust him even more. We were building something real, progressing at our own pace, without external pressure or timeline. If we ended up married someday, great. If we built a committed partnership without legal paperwork, equally great. The relationship mattered more than the label. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We're working hard toward 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content like this. Click that red button below and join us. August marked 2 years since Jessica moved into my house and began her campaign of destruction. The anniversary passed unremarked, just another date on the calendar, no emotional weight attached. I'd processed that trauma so thoroughly it had lost power to hurt me, transformed into distant memory rather than fresh wound. That emotional freedom felt like final victory, proof that healing wasn't just possible but complete. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus and Jessica's relationship remained strained, communication limited to occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday acknowledgments. Apparently, he'd sold our wedding rings, unable to look at them without shame, donating the proceeds to an organization supporting domestic abuse survivors. The gesture felt performative to me, attempting to buy absolution for sins requiring genuine internal work, but at least some good came from the wreckage. Jessica apparently had moved back to Portland quietly, working some entry-level job far below her qualifications, her reputation preceding her in ways that limited opportunities. Part of me felt satisfaction knowing she faced consequences for her actions. But mostly I felt nothing, her fate irrelevant to my happiness. She taught me expensive lessons I'd never forget, but beyond that educational value, she simply didn't matter anymore. Fall arrived again, 2 full years since the nightmare began, and I was genuinely, completely happy. Not the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves everything was fine, but the solid contentment of a life well lived, choices made with wisdom, relationships chosen with care. My house, my career, my friendships, my relationship with Tom, all of it felt authentic and earned, built on foundations of self-knowledge and hard-won strength. One October evening, working late in my home office, I received an unexpected email. Marcus, reaching out with subject lines simply, accountability. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity won. He'd written a long message, therapy speak and genuine-sounding remorse, taking full responsibility for everything that had happened. He acknowledged believing Jessica's lies without question, throwing me out without investigation, destroying what could have been a beautiful marriage through his own willful blindness and need to see his daughter as victim rather than perpetrator. He wasn't asking for anything, not forgiveness or second chances, or even response. He said he was writing because his therapist had suggested acknowledging harm done as part of his own healing process, but he understood I owed him nothing, not even the courtesy of reading his words. He ended by saying I deserved better than he'd given me, that he hoped I'd found happiness, and that he lived with regret every single day for his choices. I read it twice, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even residual hurt. Just acknowledgement that he'd finally understood what he'd destroyed and why. I didn't respond. He was right that I owed him nothing, and engaging would only crack open a door better left permanently sealed. I filed the email in a folder marked closure and returned to my work, the interruption minimal and ultimately meaningless. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by clicking that button right now. Your support means absolutely everything to us. Tom and I celebrated 2 years together in November, a quiet dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. We'd grown comfortable together without losing excitement, building a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine friendship, and compatible life goals. He'd essentially moved into my house, though he kept his apartment officially, both of us cautious about formalizing too quickly. But we were building a life together, slowly and carefully, and it felt right in ways my marriage to Marcus never had. My parents adored seeing me genuinely happy, whole in ways I'd never been during my first marriage. Mom said I'd found my sparkle again, that light in my eyes that had dimmed during those awful years. Dad stopped making subtle comments about Tom the way he'd done with Marcus, concerns masked as jokes. They trusted my judgment now, seeing I'd learned to recognize genuine partnership versus performance. The holidays brought their usual warmth and chaos, family gatherings where I felt entirely present and engaged rather than performing happiness while dying inside. A Christmas shopping, baking cookies, decorating the house, all of it brought genuine joy rather than obligation. I'd reclaimed every tradition, made them mine again, erasing the taint of memories from when Jessica had poisoned everything with her presence and Marcus had enabled her toxicity. New Year's Eve, surrounded by friends who'd become family, I reflected on the 3 years since my marriage ended. The first year had been survival, raw and painful, focused on simply getting through each day without collapsing. The second year had been rebuilding, deliberate and careful, establishing new foundations and patterns. This third year had been thriving, confident and joyful, reaping the benefits of all that hard work. I'd transformed from victim to survivor to someone who'd integrated her trauma and emerged stronger. Rachel proposed a toast at midnight, celebrating not just the new year but the woman I'd become, the obstacles I'd overcome, the life I'd built with intention and courage. Everyone raised their glasses, friends who'd watched the whole journey, supported every step, celebrated every victory. Tom kissed me as fireworks exploded outside, and I felt complete in ways that had nothing to do with him or any relationship, just the deep satisfaction of being authentically, unapologetically myself. The new year brought opportunities I'd been working toward for years, professional recognition and personal growth. I was invited to teach a workshop at a national conference, sharing expertise I'd developed through years of dedicated work. My boss hinted strongly at a vice president position opening soon, encouraging me to apply, confident I'd be the strongest candidate. Everything I'd built professionally was reaching fruition, career dreams actualizing through sustained effort and excellence. In February, 3 years after the divorce finalized, I finally removed my married name entirely from everything, a detail I'd procrastinated handling. Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Morrison again, my maiden name restored across all documents and accounts. That small administrative act felt significant, final erasure of the woman who'd tried to be Mrs. Henderson and nearly lost herself in the attempt. Sarah Morrison was whole and strong, and exactly who she was meant to be. Tom and I discussed marriage occasionally, hypothetically, neither pushing toward or away from it. We were happy as we were, committed and building futures together without needing legal documentation to validate what we both felt. Maybe someday we'd make it official, or maybe this undefined but deeply committed partnership was exactly what we both needed. The flexibility felt mature, relationship structures chosen for us rather than because society said we should follow predetermined paths. Spring cleaning that year, I finally boxed up the last remnants of my marriage to Marcus, things I'd kept for no good reason except inertia. Old cards, a few photographs, random items that had once seemed meaningful. I donated what I could, threw away the rest, felt lighter with each item released. Mrs. Patterson helped, understanding without explanation the cathartic power of physical purging, clearing space literally and metaphorically for new growth. If you're still with me at the end of this journey, please subscribe to the channel. We're building toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes everything we do possible. Click that button and join our community. My life had become beautifully ordinary, filled with work I loved, relationship that nurtured me, friendships that sustained me, hobbies that challenged me. No drama, no crisis, just the pleasant rhythm of days well lived. Sometimes I'd catch myself marveling at the peace, hardly believing this was my actual life after years of chaos and pain. But it was real, earned through fighting for myself when it would have been easier to accept victimhood. The pottery classes continued, my skills developing to the point where Linda suggested I consider selling pieces at local craft fairs. I demurred, wanting to keep it purely creative rather than commercial, but appreciated the validation. My pieces had improved dramatically, still imperfect but now intentionally so, embracing wabi-sabi philosophy that finds beauty in imperfection. Much like myself, I'd become comfortable with flaws that made me unique rather than striving for impossible perfection. One Saturday in May, Tom and I were planting vegetables in the backyard garden when he mentioned his lease was up for renewal. He asked, somewhat nervously, if maybe we should stop pretending he lived elsewhere when he spent 90% of his time at my place. I laughed and agreed, realizing I'd been thinking the same thing but worried about suggesting it first. We decided he'd move in officially, combining households fully, taking the next natural step in building our life together. The logistics were surprisingly easy, Tom not being particularly attached to most of his furniture or possessions. We merged lives smoothly, his books joining mine on shelves, his coffee maker replacing my inferior one, both of us adjusting to fully shared space with minimal friction. It felt right, natural progression rather than forced timeline, and I appreciated that we'd waited until we were both absolutely certain rather than rushing because relationship escalator said it was time. My parents were thrilled, seeing this as confirmation that I'd truly moved on and found healthy love. They helped Tom move, Dad offering unsolicited advice about living with strong women, Mom pulling Tom aside to say she was grateful he appreciated what he had in me. The acceptance from my parents mattered, their judgment having proven reliable when mine had been compromised by infatuation and desire to make Marcus happy. Summer brought the camping trip Tom and I had planned, 3 weeks exploring national parks across the West. We hiked through Yellowstone, rafted the Colorado River, watched sunsets in Utah's canyon country that painted the rocks in impossible colors. Time away from daily routine deepened our connection, sharing adventures and challenges, supporting each other through difficult trails and weather that didn't cooperate with our plans. We were good partners, complementary strengths, and compatible approaches to problem solving. One night, camped in Zion National Park, stars thick overhead and canyon walls dark silhouettes against the sky, Tom asked if I was happy. Not just content or satisfied, but truly happy. I thought about it seriously, taking inventory of my life, and answered honestly yes. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because I'd built something real and meaningful, relationships chosen wisely, career cultivated carefully, home created intentionally. I'd earned this happiness through surviving things that could have destroyed me and choosing to thrive instead. He smiled, said he could tell that happiness looked good on me. Then he said he was happy too, that our relationship was the healthiest he'd ever experienced, built on honest communication, mutual respect, and genuine friendship underneath the romance. We didn't solve all each other's problems or complete each other in toxic codependent ways. We enhanced each other's already whole lives, adding joy and support and companionship without demanding sacrifice of core identity. That conversation, lying under infinite stars in the wilderness, felt like another form of commitment, perhaps more meaningful than legal marriage. We were choosing each other continuously, every day, without obligation or coercion. Just two people who genuinely liked and loved each other, building a life together because it brought happiness to both. That felt revolutionary after my experience with Marcus, where obligation and guilt had been twisted into justifications for staying in something fundamentally broken. Please subscribe to our channel if this story has meant something to you. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every person who joins helps us continue creating meaningful content. Click that subscribe button now. By the time we returned home in August, bronze-skinned and relaxed, I felt more myself than perhaps ever before. The woman who'd left Portland 3 weeks ago had been carrying residual tension, slight guardedness, protective walls built during recovery from Marcus and Jessica's betrayal. The woman returning had released those final defensive structures, trusting fully in the life she'd built and her own judgment about who deserved space in it. Work welcomed me back with the promotion I'd been hoping for, Vice President of Finance, corner office with views of Mount Hood on clear days, salary that reflected my expertise and value. I'd earned every step of the climb through competence and dedication, professional success entirely mine regardless of relationship status. Standing in my new office, watching sunset paint the mountain pink and gold, I felt pride untempered by anyone else's contribution or claim. Rachel was promoted around the same time, her investigation firm growing rapidly as her reputation for thorough, ethical work spread. We celebrated together, two women who'd supported each other through career building and personal crisis, genuinely thrilled for each other's success. She'd married her partner earlier that summer, small ceremony in their backyard, and I'd been honored to stand beside her. Our friendship had deepened through years of showing up for each other, the kind of bond that becomes family by choice. Fall arrived again, for years since the nightmare began, and I was so far removed from that woman Marcus had thrown out that she felt like a character from someone else's story. I'd evolved completely, transformed by trauma into someone stronger and wiser, taking the worst experience of my life and using it as catalyst for positive change. Not that I was grateful for the pain itself, but I appreciated who I'd become through surviving and transcending it. One October afternoon, I was leading a workshop at the industry conference, sharing expertise with peers from across the country, when I noticed Marcus in the back of the room. My heart didn't skip, my hands didn't shake. I just noted his presence and continued presenting without faltering. After the session, people crowded around with questions and business cards, genuine interest in my ideas and approaches. Marcus waited until the crowd thinned, then approached cautiously. He congratulated me on the presentation and promotion, having apparently kept loose tabs on my career through mutual professional